They're already here. They're very disciplined. We are the ones, the problem ones. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome back to our second part of our symposium. It's been wonderful, very meaningful morning with Andrea and Daniel Assisi. And now we're going to have Joe and Marcelo for the second part of the symposium. And it's going to be followed by questions and answer after Marcelo ends the symposium, the day. After the symposium, I ask you to stay so we can sing happy birthday to the TSS. We have a cake and we can celebrate together this day.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Absolutely. So the second part is going to be, we're going to start with Joe. Joe to follow Danielle. It's not an easy task after this big lunch.
Nonsense.
And Joe is going to be talking about assisted death, a spirit's view. And then Marcelo is going to be talking about life, a priceless gift. And I think we're going to end in a very nice and beautiful note. With that being said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Marcelo. A second. Okay. So, Marcelo Netto has a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering. Born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, he has resided in the United States since 1997. Marcelo is a co-founder of the Conscious Living Spirits Group in North Miami, where he serves as a vice president of the board of directors. As an active supporter of the Spiritist movement, he is also the current vice president of the Spirits Federation of Florida in the dissemination of Spirits book in the United States and Canada. Yeah, Canada. He represents EDISE of America, an affiliated branch of the International Spirits Council publisher in Brazil, as president. And we're going to start with Joe. He's my husband. He was born in Rio.
That's it. Don't need anything else.
He's the father of my two kids and the grandfather of my grandson. He is the precious gift of my life, and he's the president of the TSS, and he's been involved in the Spirits movement in Canada. He was the ex-president of the Canadian Spirits Council, and he now serves as a director of the Canadian Spirits Council. He's also leads a lot of activities here at the TSS, and we are very happy and blessed to have him with us in this journey. So, with all my love, I invite you to come.
It's always a kind of a tension moment when your wife is improvising and talking about your life. You never quite know what she's going to say. Yes, following Danielle is a great challenge, but following lunch is even a tougher challenge. I have now to wake you up with the exciting topic of death. But somebody's got to do it, and I'm happy to be here this afternoon. Very glad that you guys have stayed on for the second half of our symposium. And I am going to talk about a fairly difficult topic, which is death. You would think that as spiritists, talking about death becomes easier, but it just changes how we talk about it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easier. We know more, we have higher expectations, but we also need to reflect upon those around us who do not have the same understanding. And nowhere is this more true than end-of-life decisions. And we're all going to be there at some point in time. So we've heard this morning Andrea talking about the beginning, of each incarnation, a reincarnation, and the consequences of an early termination of that life. We heard Danielle speak around those who come with a purpose and unfortunately they quit consciously, or as we were talking about, not necessarily consciously, but they shorten their lives before the time. This next lecture is about those who have had very likely a full life, or are near or coming near to the moment of death. And now we talk a lot about being able to make choices of how we want to die. We have this idea that we are under control of our lives, and that consequently we have to be under control of our deaths. Both of these assumptions are dreams or mistakes. We're not fully owners of our life. It's a gift that's been given to us by God. And consequently, we are also not the owners of our death, because everything has a purpose. Nevertheless, the question is still very pertinent. And especially here in Canada, as I'm going to speak later on, it's only been 1 month since the royal assessment of the law that allows medically assisted dying. Euthanasia is the word more commonly used, or used to be used, but there's all other ways of describing this. People talk about medically assisted dying, medically assisted death. They talk about death with dignity, choices in death, right? And it really comes down to figuring out how we're going to face probably our biggest fear. And that's natural. Even though we've gone through this moment many times before in previous lives, nevertheless, it is a mystery, an enigma. We often fear the pain. We fear what's going to happen to us afterwards. We fear oblivion, that this is the end and nothing else will occur later. In great part, this is why it's such a blessing to be a Spiritist. Some of those fears do go away, but not all of them. We have a natural instinct for survival. We don't want to die. We want to continue living. And as it comes closer to the time where we have to move on, we will become afraid. Especially if we are suffering from some kind of disease that weakens our body, affects our mind, possibly even affects our dignity as human beings. We hear a lot about individuals with Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson, and a number of other degenerative diseases. And we fear that we're going to be one of those. But the reality is that these things are not under our control anymore. So how do we react? It comes down to a tremendous moral dilemma. It's very easy for us as healthy individuals today to try to imagine what it will be like if we're under that condition, under that situation. But it's impossible to walk in somebody's shoes who's suffering. There are a lot of good arguments for being charitable, being kind, and terminating the suffering of another human being. We often hear that, death is a private matter and nobody else has the right to interfere. Possibly. If we're sick, we have the right to die when and how we want to. We have to respect the wishes of the dying. The next one's interesting. The right to life, which, we heard it's our primordial right, is not just this right to simply to exist. It's a right of quality of life. That's questionable. It's a very modern thought, actually, this notion of quality and value of life. And it's an interesting combination because value comes out of a lot of what we talk about value and quality comes out of a materialistic point of view. And we're trying to transpose that to our more spiritual aspects. So if we value and have quality in the physical world, this is what we also need to have in our decisions about our life. Right to die in dignity and without pain. Yeah, everybody wants to be really, really healthy until they're 94 and then die in their sleep, not having to suffer anything. Why do we wish that? Because we're afraid. We're afraid of suffering. Even though, and here's the catch, the reason for us to live is to suffer. And then we're afraid to suffer when we die. Then there's the issue of the people who do not want to go on living. We saw this about this suicide, right? I want to give up. What's the point? Right? I just found out that I've been diagnosed with some terrible disease. And my life is never going to get better than what it is right now. So why live? And finally, there's the principle of individual autonomy. The last one I don't even count, because that is such a weak argument. It's the economic factor. Sick people cost money. So it'd probably be cheaper for us if we just killed them early so they don't have to be using our hospitals. What these pro-euthanasia arguments have in common, they're extremely egocentric and selfish. Now, one might argue that we have the right to be selfish about our lives. But nevertheless, it is a summary of what these are proposing. I don't want to suffer. I don't want to spend money. I don't want to take too long to die. Whatever is waiting for me next, even if there's nothing, might as well get it over with and let's go. 100% egocentric. Some of the arguments against euthanasia are interesting. The first group is around medically assisted death. And we're going to talk more about this later on. Is the ethical dilemma of a professional that has been trained to do no harm. That's the oath. I shall do no harm to my patients. And then the patients ask them, kill me. And we try to rationalize this as the opposite of harm. We're doing something good for them. You'll be doing something good for your patient. But it would put many of the folks, the medical professionals, in a terrible ethical dilemma. And then finally, the strongest ones are moral and theological, right? Is it murder? Is it suicide? Well, actually, it's both. right? If you help somebody die because they ask you to die, it is murder and suicide. It's not one or the other. And the most important one is that where we begin the discussions, where we began the theme of this symposium, is because the sanctity of human life, sanctity, right? It is divine. It is a divine gift. If you believe in God, would you ever break a present that He gave you? If God came in here and gave you a present, what would you do with that present? You would defend it with your life. Right? Well, that gift is our life. So let's defend our life with what? With our life. What these arguments don't get is what Spiritism brings into it. Yes, it is true that it violates God's wish, but you know what? We also know that we have the free will. We can do it. We can kill ourselves. We can kill others. There's murders. There's all kinds of things, and they all violate this divinity of life. What it doesn't explain is the consequences of that act. But here we're talking about death, and we're talking about end of life moments. Let's just take a couple of minutes to talk about what is death. You know, a lot of people who probably diagnosed or found to be dead 50 years ago would be saved today. Because traditionally is that if your heart stopped pounding and you weren't breathing, dead. Let's bury the person right away, because they're going to stink pretty soon. We know that that's not true today. Right? We know that there are several minutes that the body can persist without the heartbeat, without oxygen. Yes, the longer it takes, it might cause damages, but we can bring those patients back in a growing window. Used to be a couple of minutes before, 4 minutes. I've heard of up to 8 minutes. People, 6, 8. I mean, the numbers are changing. It depends on what happens. Depends on the temperature of the body, right? So if a person is drowning in a very cold water, they brought them back up to, I think, 10 minutes afterwards, right? It's biological. The spirit is still there, hasn't left yet. So now the current concept is more sophisticated, more complex, right? It has to do with the cessation of all biological functions that sustain us, the living being, right? This means that we have no longer control of our breathing or temperature, our electrolyte balance. Basically, your body is already starting its own death process, right? And there are criteria now to measure whether you have brain activity or not. We created the term of brain dead, right? Which again, it's being challenged every year. There is more questioning to what does that actually mean. Can we recover somebody that's there? People who are in coma. Right? It used to be that once you got into coma, basically they started making your funeral arrangements. Right? That's no longer the case. So the very notion of the vital principles still existing within our body, which is, as Spiritists, how we define to be living. At which moment does the vital principle move away from your physical body? That's going to be the moment of death. But how do we detect that? Right? We don't know how to detect the vital principles yet. There are tests, but they're all biological tests that can be done. And we have to have these because at one point in time we can't just wait for the body to start to decompose to make sure that you're dead. But what is the Spiritist point of view around death, right? So we go back to our basic works. The Spirit's book. Question 136. Is the soul independent of the vital principle? right? The body is the envelope of the soul. And the spirits get very nervous when they keep saying the same things over and over, so they kind of say, we already repeatedly told you, right? Don't ever question that. Spirit, perispirit, disconnected from the body. The vital principle animates life into the body. Can a body exist without a soul? Yes, but it only when the body ceases to live that the soul quits it. There's always a chicken and egg. Who leaves? Does the soul leave the body and then the body dies? Or does the body die and then the soul leaves the body? This answers that question. The spirit cannot leave the body while it's still there with the vital principle. It has to die first. The death as we define in Spiritism around the vital principle. That is why we can bring a person back to life minutes after a lot of the functions have stopped working. Because the vital principle has not left the body. We're still not dead. Not yet. Organic life may vitalize a body without a soul, but the soul cannot inhabit a body deprived of organic life. Right? So we can't just take a spirit and put it into a dead body and say just because the spirit goes in it, it's going to become alive now. A lot of science fiction writers love that kind of concept, right? Move a spirit from one body to the dead body, and then Frankenstein is alive. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? You gotta have the vital principle to make it alive. And what would our body be if it had no soul? Right? It's an empty shell, right? It's a mass of flesh without intelligence. Anything you choose to call it, except a man or a woman. Question 68 also talks specifically about death. Right? So what is the cause of death of organic beings? The exhaustion of their bodily organs. Right? So when everything stops to cease working, then the body is dead. The vital principle has left. Now, this was written 160 years ago. And now science is almost coming to the exact same definition. Cessation of all biological functions. Right? I picked this from a medical kind of magazine. The spirits had already told us that a century and a half ago. So I guess it must be true. Couple of definitions, because we talk about euthanasia, but there's more than just one definition of these things. There is dystonasia, which from the Greek means bad death, right? And that basically describes when we keep a person alive exclusively through machines. So the person is for all purposes not going to recover. It's just the machines that are keeping them alive. There is another term called orthothanasia, again from the Greek, which means good death. So whereas one was bad death, this is the right death. This is the right death. The right death is that a person is very sick, very frail, and wants to die. They don't want to be killed. They just want the process to finish. And then doctors can stop feeding that person. They may stop drinking water, right? You just lose the will to continue. Your time has come. So that's another way of, I don't even say accelerating, but you stop slowing down the death process. You let it proceed its natural process. Right? Then we have euthanasia, which is called a good death, and it's ending a life in order to relieve pain and suffering. Now you read it like this, it seems so compassionate. Right? My only experience with euthanasia was not with a human being, was with a pet. Right? We had a dear dog, and she was very sick. She was stopped eating. She was blind. So we decided to take her to the vet and have the vet put her to sleep, which is the term. We never say we're going to put a human being to sleep. We do say we put dogs to sleep. And I had never done that before. Sandra and I were there, and we wanted to be present. And even though we could rationalize every process of why we did it, and we were being compassionate, and we also know that a dog does not have trials and other things that they have to resolve in this life, that we were being 100% trying to reduce that suffering. Even though that's been 13 years ago, it still haunts me at the moment. I still find myself with guilt of having made that decision, because it was my responsibility, right? Our responsibility, but we've made a decision to do so. So I don't know why the Greeks would call this a good death. And I guess if you're fully material in your view, maybe it is the goodness that you're trying to do. People do this with the best intentions. But we'll show you why it's not a good idea. A better idea is what we call palliative care. It is a very humane way to deal with end of life, where the purpose is no longer to prolong life, but to provide relief and comfort, typically in your own home, so you can then accomplish your last steps. But essentially what we're talking about here is this notion of assisted death, when somebody else helps you die, has all aspects around laws, the legal framework around this that allows us so we don't get arrested as murderers. There is the medical angle, which has to do with the scientific knowledge of pain thresholds around definition of death, survival chances of imminent death, and so forth. And the ethical and moral values that we've been talking here about, our consciousness, our beliefs in terms of God, the holiness of our life, and so forth. And a lot of the discussion in the general public is around these three themes. But what we bring as Spiritists is yet another dimension of immortality. Because the question changes drastically if you know that this death is not the end. Not even close. Interesting that Kardec talked about, what is life and what is death early on in the Spirit's book, but it is in the Gospel according to Spiritism that we find true guidance around this assisted death topic, or euthanasia, right? So, in question, in chapter 5, blessed are the afflicted, and Jesus talked about this in the Sermon of the Mount, and he talks that, there is a blessed aspect to our suffering. So in item 27, there's a question: should anyone put an end to another's probation when they can, or should God's purpose be respected, so leaving things to take their own course? Now, Kardec, it's a very biased question. Who would say that, we're going to go against God? We know better than God. But that's what we do when we make these decisions. We're putting ourselves above God. We know better than God, right? Because who are we to end another person's probation? It would be great if by ending the probation, that their debt was resolved. But it isn't, right? So, a lot of things that I won't read it all, but there's this idea of an interest on the debt that they talk about. So if you pay your debt according to your reincarnatory planning, you're doing very well, because you accomplish what you came for, and you can then move on to the next thing that you have to do. If your life is cut short, even by a few minutes, and you don't complete what you propose to do, there's going to be interest on the debt because you did not pay all the stuff that you had to pay, right? How do we know that by doing that, then, we become not a savior, but an instrument of torture for that spirit? Think of that. When we think we're doing something compassionate, we're actually doing something more harmful to the spirit. And the spirits tell us, rather than assuming that ending life is the right answer, which never is, have you done everything possible to help that spirit while they're still here? From moral consolation, material help, advice. So if you have someone who is in terrible mental stress or distress, have you given that person all of the chance to recover? Have we used the maximum strength to attenuate the bitterness of atonement? I love that phrase, the bitterness of atonement. We are atoning our past errors. We are learning the right path. And it's a bitter process. Do we have to have the full bitterness all the time? No. By allowing ourselves to be helped by others, it's actually the opposite. You're actually getting more benefits yourself, and because you're helping others by allowing them to help you, you actually accelerate how you pay back your debt. So killing is not helping. Killing is just shortening what they were here to do. Continue. Next item. A man is agonizing under cruel suffering. His state is known to be desperate. Would it be licit to save him a few instants of anguish by hastening his end? How many movies have we seen where, it's a dramatic moment, somebody saved you and then they were shot and they're dying, and then you go and help them die quicker because now they're suffering. Right? Soldiers shoot other soldiers who've been injured in war because they can't be helped. Are they helping? Do we have that right? Who has given you the right to prejudge God's purpose? Did you get a letter from God, an email, saying it's okay to do it? I don't think so. Right? The next point is very interesting. Who knows what a swan song is?
A what?
Swan song. People who are very ill, for a few minutes, they recover their senses. They feel no pain. They're in almost a state of grace. They can communicate with their loved ones, and then they die. And that's a blessed moment for the spirit. Why? Because they've been reflecting all that moments leading up to, even if they're unconscious, their spirit is not unconscious. They've been reflecting about the rights and the wrongs of their life, what they should or shouldn't have done, and what they should or should do next. So that moment of sanity that they have, they recover their faculties. It is so important and precious to the spirit before they move on. What if we had killed that person a few minutes before that? Because we did not have faith that this could happen. They complete, and this is St. Louis, his spirit that shows up quite often in the Gospel. It says, the materialist who only sees the body is not apt to understand these things. So mitigate the last suffering as much as you can. But guard yourself against abbreviating life, be it even for a minute, as this minute can be the means of avoiding many tears in the future. Now, if we love, if we want to be cheerful to the person, make them as comfortable as possible, but let them live the time that they need to live. Divaldo actually wrote a book called Eutanasia Nunca, Euthanasia Never. And here's a quote that says, life on earth is an experience called reincarnation. with the purpose of educating us the great flight of immortality. Every minute is a minute of education for us. Now, the reason that I picked this topic, and I already mentioned it, is there's been a debate for the last 3 years, starting in Quebec and then British Columbia, finally made its way to the Supreme Court. Do individuals have the right to choose to die? And the Supreme Court sided with the patients and saying, yes, there got to be some way that if you don't believe in this immortality thing, in this religion, if you don't have any religious issues, why can't you decide how you want to die? And that has become what's called Bill C-14. It's a federal legislation on medical assistance in dying. So why did the government introduce this? As I said, there was a decision on the Supreme Court on a patient named Carter that would argue that the laws should allow for medical supervision or assistance in shortening one's life. But they specifically use the term medical assistance in dying. Right? Because first of all, it is only going to be permitted under a medical context. Marco Magalhães made the comment that abortion is like that already in Canada. It is a medical matter that can only be done under medical control and supervision. Which means that this law, thank God, does not allow a parent or a relative to kill mercy killing was another term that used to be used a long time ago, to do euthanasia at home. Apply some injection and kill your spouse. Why? Because the opportunity for abuse would be enormous. How do we really know that that was the intent of the person, right? It's called medical rather than doctor assisted, because in Canada they are actually allowing other medical professionals beyond just doctors to do this procedure. So nurses, for example, will be able to do it as well. And the words in dying are used because the eligibility should be limited to patients who are dying. Yeah, this is the part that's a bit confusing, because guess what? We're all dying. Right? We don't know when, but we do know that we will die. And the process of death starts the moment we are born. So how do you define that? So just a couple of ideas, because this is very important for Canadians to know. These are the criteria that they've created that allows who is eligible to be subject to this law. You have to be eligible for health services funded by the federal or provincial. So again, because it's a medical procedure, it has to be part of our universal health system, which means that in theory, we are not positioning Canada as a tourist suicide destination, as other countries in Europe already have. So today, well, before you could go to Switzerland, or mostly Switzerland that was famous for this, and you can get a doctor there to kill you. You have to be at least 18 years old. And this was a very debated point, because it eliminates this decision of death for young children who are suffering. But our politicians felt that it was going too far to start to put that in. The resistance would be too big. You got to have a grievous and irremediable medical condition, and I'll go into more detail what that means. You have to make a request actually in writing to have somebody help you to kill yourself. And before they can do this, they have to give you, the professionals have to give you counseling around your diagnosis, what are the treatment options that are available to you, and how they can relieve the suffering. So let's say that you're still responding to pain medication. So they have to tell you that we can manage your pain. But if you still think, I don't want to manage my pain, I just want to die, they didn't have to allow you to die. So what is the idea of the medical conditions that would allow us? So, and I've highlighted some more polemic points here. First of all, you have to have a serious illness, disease, or disability. Disability. If you're disabled, if you're in a wheelchair and you're not going to get out of the wheelchair, you're depressed, and you're over 18, you will be able to ask somebody to kill you. Right? You have to be in an advanced state of decline that cannot be reversed. Well, if you're in that situation, it cannot be reversed, and it will only get worse over time because you don't get out of the chair. You're fully paralyzed. Suffering unbearably. That's subjective. I will say whether my suffering is bearable or not. Nobody can challenge that. Right? And be at a point where your natural death has become reasonably foreseeable. Again, I can foresee that I will die. Everyone here, I can foresee death in everybody's future. So the law has become very open to interpretation, but still at least under the explicit consent of the individual. Whereas other countries, if somebody is in a coma, they could have whoever is legally responsible for them to make end-of-life decisions. In this case, you can only make that end-of-life decision if you are in full plenitude of your mental state, which is also a bit of a question around the mentally ill. As long as the mentally ill understands what they're asking, they're subject, they are allowed to do this. So let's finish this. The idea is that when there is no hope that anything will improve. That's the basic promise of euthanasia. When there's no more hope, we'll end your suffering. But the reality is that the immortal spirit will always be rewarded for the trials of its earthly existence, every minute of that trial. And the greater the suffering, the greater the difficulties, the greater the rewards as well. So let's think about that. It's always going to be very personal, right? But remember that in the immortal spirits, the few minutes, days, weeks, or months that you're suffering could make a great difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was very it's very sad, to know that Canada chose to go this path. We just hope that this will bring something good in the future. Who knows? We don't know, but we just cross our fingers for they one day be reconsider this whole thing, because it's really sad. Anyway, we now invite Marcelo to do our last lecture of our symposium, and as soon as Marcelo ends, we're going to open again for the questions and answer with Joe and Marcelo.
Danielle is facilitator.
There you go. Thank you, Danielle.
I shall facilitate or instigate.
Perfect. So, Marcelo, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. He's usually not this shy.
No.
Today I'm a little shy. It's truly a blessing being here, and it's a great honor to participate in this event, participating in the 6th anniversary of this blessing home that produces too much light. My first impression when I crossed that door, and we usually Spiritists say something like that, I had the impression that the mentor of the house hug us, somebody shows up giving us How are you? Good luck. Be calm. Everything is going to work fine. But it was more than that. It was more than that. Because the subject that was chosen to the anniversary of this house is a very important subject. And we all related to a subject of this matter, of this importance. In closing an event of this magnitude, after these three wonderful speakers, it's truly a challenge for me because I'm not the best. And this is not a false humility. It's simply an acknowledgement of they are simply fantastic speakers. But bringing the last lecture, talking about life, a priceless gift, it's something that put me in a stage of emotion that I hope I can address the topic with the same seriously way of approaching a topic as they did. What is actually life? We have many definitions of life. We think life is simply a moment of an organism that simply lives, have some metabolical events inside of a cell. And Joana de Angelis is writing an introduction of this book, Life Challenges and Solutions, bring us that good lexicographers define life as a set of properties and qualities by which animals and plants, unlike dead organisms or raw matter, are maintained in continuous activity, manifested as organic functions such as metabolism, growth, reaction to stimuli, adaptation to the environmental, and reproduction. Life may also be seen as the period that elapses between the actions and reactions that vitalize living beings as a result of highly complex cellular organizations which develop between birth and death. Is this all there is? Do you think this is only life? The definition brought by Joana de Angelis when she started this wonderful book, and this is actually the definition that most of us, like maybe the great majority of the human populations, defines life. But life is much more than that. But we see other views. We see biologists saying that life is the result of cells organized in remarkably agglutinations, forming individualized organs, systems, and functions. We see other philosophers offering various formulations that derive from their experiential, and cultural perspective in accordance with the school to which they belong. However, they restrict life to the period of between the cradle and the grave. And we see more or less us, spiritualistic people, in spiritualism. It starts from the reality of transcendent being that created life and continues to maintain it, allowing for an infinite quantitative and qualitative development on its way to perfection. Well, let's see something. The definition of life, in fact, varies a lot. According to each department of this person is belonging to, they will have a different definition of life. Therefore, the definition of life varies according to the school of philosophical thought or scientific discipline. Since individuals anchor their view of it own their respective foundations of cultural support. And Joana de Angelis brings more. And thus, successively people understand and define life in accordance with their own perception, emotion, and cultural capacity, furnishing concepts that are compatible with their own way of being. But life is much more than that. Life is God. Life is beyond our comprehension, our capacity to see and to understand and to grasp. Because life will touch us in a way individually. And this is a personal experience that each one of us will address life accordingly with his or her capacity to see what is life for me. For some people, life is miserable. For others, life is wonderful because everything is running smoothly in my life. I have a good financial standards. My bank account is full. I have my retirement plan very well planned, and everything is going to be fine. My love, the love of my life, loves me. I have a beautiful family. And for others, life is miserable, and they want to get rid of their lives. What is the difference? What is life? Why these differences between there's like chosen people, there's like preferences in the eyes of God. In 2006, I was in Brazil. I was in Pernambuco, close to Recife. I know you are from there.
At the beach.
At the beach. Actually, we are visiting a facility. We had a friend. I have a friend, Nando Cordell, is a very close friend of us and of ours. And he was like, "Well, let's visit that specific monastery that is very close to the facility that he takes care of, like many children, and he provides like shelter and food and education for many children. But right beside that place that he managed, the facility that he managed, it was like a monastery, and a few nuns there with a lot of heart, taking care of the needy people of the world. And in one specific bed at that monastery, it was like a little guy with no arms, no legs, completely blind, with a little short, with apparently no hope, and still cherishing life as he never did before. And we approach him, and the nuns, the Mother Superior was there, like bringing us, "Oh, this is a precious jewel of this monastery. Oh, what is your name?" "Well, Sebastian. This is the precious jewel of this monastery. Why? Go there and talk to him." And he was there. "Hi, Sebastian. How you doing this morning?" "I'm doing wonderful. Life is wonderful." Why life is wonderful? Because we are trying to instigate him, and he was Catholic. Look what he said. Life is wonderful. Life is wonderful because after this life, I will see joy, and I will have legs and arms, and I will come back to see again. Do you truly believe this, Sebastian? I truly believe this. There's no reason for me to mourn, for me to complain, because life is wonderful. You that have legs and arms and are able to see the misery of the world, don't see the beauty of the inner world. Some may say, well, he is in a state of delusional process because of the leper that was hitting him eating him alive, but in fact was something different, because through his mediumship, he sees someone that approaches him every night and tells him life is wonderful. And we, Spiritists, believe in this. But what about the others that don't believe in life after death and these communications among the two realms of life? We will see the proof of that specific communication, because one of the nuns there was describing exactly the spirit that approached him every night. And by the description that he gave to the Mother Superior, was exactly his mother. And he never told anything about his mother. The color of her hair, the size, she was tall or short, the characteristics that define the individuality of the spirit that still goes on. And he was like fully aware that after that life he will experience, because there is a law of cause and effect, as Joe very well mentioned this, and many of you speakers before me mentioned that. He was simply, okay, I give my life to this, God's willing, because it's not, God doesn't want us to suffer. It was not God that cuts his arms or his legs. It was the process of he creates previous to that incarnation, and he understands unconsciously, or maybe consciently, he was understanding and feeling, because that specific teacher that was his mother was giving him all this information, and he simply resignates in the arms of the Father. There is a chance for each one of us. And we, of course, have like challenges to face, and we have difficulties. We have moments of anxiety. We have moments of despair. We have moments that everything falls apart, and we think nothing is going to go right. I don't know where to go. But in the life of Sebastian, in that little town, on the the outskirts of Recife. Too many. I'm hungry. I'm sorry. The outskirts of Recife, I found the best lesson of my life. And was not until in the middle of Joe's lecture that crosses my mind, what can I say about life being a precious gift? And this crosses my mind, and I have the impression that says, like, tell Sebastian's story. Tell Sebastian's story, because life is a priceless gift. No matter how much suffering that we have and we are facing, everything is going to go right. Believe this. Believe this. Joana de Angelis goes on and says that life, however, is God, and it is thus difficult, if not impossible, to be fully understood beyond its manifestations, which make a part of being's reality, preceding their appearance in material form and continuing after their bodily decomposition. Too many British accent today. Yeah. Joana de Angelis is bringing us in this wonderful book, Life Challenges and Solution. And she says, like the incomparable and non-dimensional ocean of life, we live under laws that have set the essential guidelines for the happiness awaiting everywhere, and which is the exceptional destiny for which life manifests in the world, perfection. We are destined to be perfect. We are destined to this. And because the law of cause and effect, of course, we are experiencing some moments of despair. It's natural, because this is not a punish moment of our existence. It's an educational moment, and we can do two things. with this educational process. We can simply cry and put our foot down and say something cursing. I don't agree with that. I want to kill myself. I want to do whatever we want to do, because of course we have free will, but we also have consequences to face. Or we have this example of difficulties that we are experiencing at this moment, and what we are going to do with that. Because we also can be teachers. We can be teachers because the same way Sebastian was teaching us, but not only teaching us, he was teaching all the spirits and all the ones that are there, even the nuns and the Mother Superior, saying like it's gotta be something, a reality beyond this life, because this communication take place in a frequency that it actually touching the whole convent, and it's transforming us. I'm not going to say, I know it's being recorded, but they all have the Gospel According to Spiritism, and they read the nuns like every night. Forgive me, Pope Francis, but this is happening because logic is knocking on our doors to see it's gotta be a problem. It's gotta be like a reason for all these suffering. And life has a different meaning. It's not simply making money and being materialistic. Life is wonderful. And we can go on and on and on, telling many stories that will touch our hearts and make me cry, and made me cry that day so intensely, so intensely, that's the word. The miracle of life. As much as the human mind asks questions about life in the conjuncture of today's undeniably vast intellectual knowledge, it is still difficult to find adequate answers that enable it to grasp life's full meaning and significance. But the miracle of life is much more complex than that. And for that very reason, its point of origin can only be found in the Creator, who engendered it and who has been guiding it across billions of years, effecting indispensable adaptation, developments, and variations in its structure. So, living is a sublime challenge. It is a sublime challenge. And living wisely is a blessing that is available to all who resolve decidedly to advance, overcome personal limitations, and attain communion with God. And this communion can be very weak, or could be very profound. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Once we get rid of all the materialistic point of view, everything that is impermanent, and go to the permanent beings that we are, the spirit that resides within, and we are facing some reality, sooner or later, that we are destined to be happy. Extremely happy. Joana de Angelis brings us that we are a bundle of, in her words, we are human beings are a bundle of sensations as the natural result of our journey through the early periods of evolution on their way to the reality of the emotions. Our extensive experiences in the primitive realms of the past left profound impressions that became a prevailing requirement in the personal, social, and especially psychological behavior. Impulses and reactions make up part of this process, which establishes behavior paradigms when outside the sieve of reason. And she goes on. She says like that during the stage, emotional nourishment, during that stage, emotional nourishment is received through objective sensations, through close contact with the world and its manifestations. And as a result, we pursue an excessive game of wanting to have rather than aspiring to be. We all want to have something. We want to have people. We want to have things. We want to have the life that shows up in the commercials of our TVs. But we need to aspire to be something that goes beyond the impermanent stages of our evolution. So as sleep to the subtler perceptions of existence, she goes on, we accumulate things and enjoy them to the saturation point. Then we switch to possessing other persons who may not consent to being so easily possessed. This causes emotional conflicts that disrupt the would-be possessor's intent, and frustrated because our desire does not translate into satisfaction, we become embittered and rebellious, and often turn to alcohol, tobacco, or addictive drugs as an escape, and sometimes suicide. Sensation-seeking humans. We are all sensation-seeking humans sometimes. We are demanding and possessive. We do not realize the value of other people's liberty, which they aim to control, nor are they aware of their duties towards society, which does not submit to them. We sometimes feel marginalized due to the hostility they harbor toward all who do not bow to them. I'm reading it, that thing, yeah. They turn against laws and free persons, becoming dehumanized and attacking others using every means possible. And she goes on and on, saying that the sensations, we are this bundle of sensations. And we are like in the process of feeling the emotions. The emotional process is taking place little by little. But once we are self-conscious, we are more aware of how do we feel, how do we perceive life. We have the options to change our way. And we can be more aware. We can be more self-conscious, as I said before, transforming our lives and giving more significance to this life that today it might be so bitter, so difficult, but has an importance for our process of evolution. Chico Xavier used to say, when someone approaches him with a very difficult problem in her or his life, I have this challenging my life, and I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I'm lost. What do I go? Where do I go? What am I going to do? And he reflects. He says, like, making like a 10 seconds of silence, and after that saying, big challenges only for beautiful souls who are able to overcome the obstacles they're placed over here for you. So you can be an example not only for you in exemplifying the superation process, but touching other people, touching in a way that you change the process from the student to a professor, for a teacher, and you will impact many others. So, when we suffer, I remember the words of the Beatitudes that Jesus came 2,000 years ago and brought to us. Blessed are the afflicted, for they shall be consoled. Jesus indicates simultaneously the compensations that awaits those who suffer and the resignation that leads one to bless suffering as a prelude to healing. In the Christmas time, in the decade of 1970, on the 70s, also I love to tell stories because they're very and they are all true stories. This group of people that belongs to a very humble and simple Spiritist center used to go visiting nursing homes, elderly places where the elderly are, prisons, and it was very close to Christmas. And this group of people, they decided to go to visit that specific prison. And I know many of you already know this story, but I think it's worth telling again. And a day before, one of the members were chosen to be the one speaking and talking to the prisoners in that specific prison in Rio de Janeiro. And he was like empty. His mind was like, I don't know what to say. It's close to Christmas and I have no inspiration. I would like to know where. Asking the help of the spirits. And he went to sleep. The other day, he woke up with an idea of saying and talking about the wedding of the Cana. You all know about the wedding of the Cana, that moment that Jesus transformed water into wine. And he saw no relationships. I said, oh my God, there's no relationship. What kind of inspiration is this? Talking about the wedding of the Cana in the prison, close to Christmas. He sees no meaning of that thing. But he decided to follow his advice and his inspiration, quoting. And he all went to that specific place. And they made a prayer, they talk a little bit, and then they invite this gentleman, his name is Caesar Reis, to talk for the prisoners that were there gathering in that. It was a room like this big. And he started like saying and talking, telling the story of the wedding of the Cana. And by the end of the story, in telling that specific episode in the life of Christ, he got the inspiration that says like, well, once you follow Christ's steps, you can transform your life from water to wine. He says, oops, there's got to be something interesting. And he developed the subject towards that subject. Everybody was crying, all the prisoners were there because, of course, like it was in the ambience, the spirituality works individually in every prisoner there, but one specific prisoner down the hall, as usual, always very close face, no smiling, no cries, no tears, simply the same very close face. And then, well, it ends the conversation, the speak. And all the prisoners were conducted to their cells by the gentlemen, the policemen, the guards that were there. And when these workers, these members of the Spiritist centers was going towards the door, that specific man grabs the arms of Caesar, the one that spoke about the wedding of the Cana, hold his arm and says like, come over here for a moment. And the guards approach him like because he wants to. No, that's fine. Let me talk to him a little bit. He says, do you truly believe what you just said? I says, yes, I truly believe. You can transform your life from water to wine. No, you don't know what you're saying. You don't have a minimal idea how is life inside of the prison. You're talking this with no experience whatsoever. Here is killing or dying. I sometimes have a feeling of killing others. I heard voices telling me to kill others, and after that to killing myself, because here it's a place only for the disgrace, and I am a disgrace. Do you think there's hope for someone, a murderer like me? You don't know what you're saying. And in that specific moment, something happened involving the two people, the two men, Caesar Reis and that man that calls Ribamar Jesus. And he grabbed him by the arms. Caesar says, he looked at him in his eyes deeply and says like, what's your name? My name is Jesus Ribamar. Believe me what I am saying. I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's going to be like a walk on the flowers on the garden, but I know if you have courage and to overcome these obstacles that still resides inside of you, and you will overcome the obstacles, the most difficult obstacles and challenges it is inside of you. Some kind of connections established in that specific moment, and a tear fell into his eyes. And he was like, okay. And the guard says, now it's time to go. And this Jesus Ribamar was taken to the cell. Many years has passed. More than 20 years. Maybe 30 years. And this guy, Caesar Reis, was invited to speak in this home, in this very small Spiritist center in the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. Very poor place. Doesn't have a projector. Doesn't have like the speeches are conducted by opening randomly the gospel according to Spiritism, picking and choosing one specific part of the gospel, and the comments were made there from spontaneously. And Caesar Reis didn't know the president. He was there, sitting there, waiting for the president of the center to conduct him to that little table, and so he can talk a little bit. And then here comes the president. White hair. Now he was different. But was that specific man, the prisoner, that came to him, and when he sit right beside him, and they look at each other, says like, oh my God, it's you, Ribamar Jesus. Yes, that's me. Oh my God, what's happened to your life? Life is a precious gift. I heard you, and your words still echoing inside of my mind and my heart. I have to admit, was difficult. Was very difficult in the first days. But after I develop this kind of courage inside of me in resisting to overcome myself and not listening to this indication, this whispering from the other realm of life, telling me to kill others and to kill myself. I built within some kind of couraça, I don't know how to say this. Armor inside of me, and I overcome everything, and now I am here. I left prison, and I have to admit it was very difficult because no one wants to hire someone that was a murderer, especially in Brazil, that we don't have like all everything that we have. Yes, all the possibilities that we have here. And he was explaining him. So after that, they hug each other, and the lecture was conducted with so much of emotion. And the lecture, I believe, was like something related to life, a priceless gift. So there is a chance for each one of us to transform our lives, to make life a priceless gift, a precious gift, so we can simply switch a little bit and make this analysis a little more broadened and see something difficult, see something different than simply making a superficial analysis that sometimes lead us to a solution that no one wants to go. A suicidal event, to killing himself, or to doing an abortion, or to opting for the euthanasia, or whatever solution that is not very a good one. I'll put the last slides for us to see is the beginning of the book Nosso Lar. And I would like to read that life never ceases. Life is an eternal fount, and death is only an obscure game of illusion. A great river follows its course before joining the immense sea. Likewise, the soul also follows its course of various roads and goes through different stages. It too receives streams of knowledge here and there, augmenting the way it expresses itself and purifying its character before reaching the eternal ocean of wisdom. All path of souls, mysterious ways of the heart, it is necessary to travel them before attempting the supreme equation of eternal life. It is crucial that you live out their drama, that you know them detail by detail during the long process of spiritual perfection. One life, one act. One body, one garment. One century, one day. One task, one experience. One triumph, one acquisition. One death, one breath of renewal. How many lives? How many bodies? How many centuries? How many tasks? How many triumphs? And how many deaths do we still need in order to be happy? What do you think?
A lot more.
What?
A lot more.
A lot more. But we can resume this. Since we are Spiritists, we know a little better. I know we don't feel much because we're still like in the first steps of this process of acknowledging all these informations. But we can make a difference in our lives and in other people's lives. Not only by preaching, because sometimes preaching is so superficial. Living by the example. With the examples of our lives, we can transform many others, and we can see joy where yet yesterday it felt to be something not very joyful. And I remember the words of Jesus, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. It's a simple lecture, but I truly hope that we can live with a little more hope in our hearts and give life the value that really life has, a priceless gift in everybody's life. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we're going to have questions and answers, and I think Danielle will be doing
Instigation.
yeah.
Instigation.
And after the questions and answers, you have to stay to the cake.
It's incentive to stay a little bit longer.
It is a delicious cake.
All right, everyone.
pleasure